As we get ready for the final exam, I just want to provide you with a couple of details and help you sort out or organize the things that we've covered so far in the course. The first thing that students are always anxious about is what they need to bring, so I've made a list here. The thing that you'll notice that's kind of different is the binomial table. Bring this only if you plan to use it. You can print it out. Print it from eLearning. There's a lot of pages and not all students use it, so I don't like to have too many of those copies around. I do have a few spare. If you need some, you're welcome to come by my office beforehand and grab one. Make sure that it's blank. It can't have any notes on it, just the plain binomial table. And when you're finished, if you'd like to submit it to me for me to keep for the next statistics student, I'd be happy to do that. The exam itself, the details are here, 2.5 hours, 30 questions. Some are multiple choice and some are short answer. The short answer questions you'll ask to be rounding to 4 decimals, unless otherwise noted. If it says round to 1 or round to 2, then do that, of course. And the questions are 3 points each. They are graded on partial credit, 0 points for blank, 1 point for an attempt, like an answer but it's incorrect, 2 points for almost correct, and 3 points for perfect, the right answer. So what I do, just like with the midterm or any other exam in the class, just look at the answer first, and then if it's correct, I move on. So there's no need to write down everything you did unless you think that you're going to need me to go back and grade it for some kind of partial credit. Also will be provided are the tables and reference materials that we've used this semester. So you have a formula sheet, the Z table, and the T table. These are all on eLearning. I suggest that you print them if you haven't already, just so you know what you'll be working with on the final exam. You can use those to help you prepare. Make sure you know where everything is that you might need from that sheet. Now, to go back to this 30 questions idea, there's 30 questions and we covered about 10 content chunks, I would say, 10 modules or 10 chapters. So it works out to be about 3 per section. Some have a little bit more, and I'll indicate to you which ones those are in a minute. So these are the general ideas about the final exam. Here I've made a list for myself that really helps me get organized. So here's a list topic of each of the sessions that we covered, like the introduction, and then summarizing and organizing data, and then moving on from there, and then just the main things that are underneath these topics. So when you look at this list, it should prompt you to say, oh, I think I remember something about that. Maybe you write down some notes to yourself, but these are the key points that came from each of the main subtopics. For example, a parameter versus a statistic. What's the difference of that? Variable classification. What are the classifications? What's the difference between qualitative or quantitative variables? Can you classify them? Can you determine the level of measurement? Are they nominal, ordinal, interval, if I go in order, or ratio? Those kinds of things. Is something discrete or continuous? And then the last thing, the sampling methods. What's the difference between stratified sampling and cluster sampling? What is systematic sampling? What is simple random sampling? So these things should become familiar to you. If they're not yet, then you go back and look them up and remind yourself. I'd say mostly this section is vocabulary. So you just want to familiarize yourself with that, whether you make flashcards or just practice a whole lot. There are plenty of questions on this on the final exam review, which I pulled up right here. You'll see that like the first whole page basically has you determine the difference or classify the variable, and down a little bit more, find the sampling type. And just practice using the vocabulary of statistics. Then back here in our list, we next organized and summarized data. So that was once we got the data from those sampling methods mentioned before, what do we do to organize the data? How do we make a frequency distribution? Remember, there were classes and then frequencies. of such classes. And then from those frequencies we could make different frequencies. You could make a relative frequency, you can make a cumulative frequency, you could make histograms from there. That would be quantitative data, histograms. For qualitative data you could make bar charts. They looked the same, remember? Just subtle differences. Qualitative data could also be represented in a pie chart. You want to know how to like construct one of those, how you get there. Histograms, stem and leaf plots. So hopefully those things are coming back to your mind, and if they're not, you go to the review or you go back to that section and remind yourself. We really hit the numbers finally when we got to numerical summaries of data. These were broken down into 3 types: center, dispersion or spread, and position. So measures of center, those were the mean, the median, and the mode. Measures of dispersion were the range, the variance, and the standard deviation. Now here's where you kind of hopefully notice the difference between the population variance and the sample variance, or the population standard deviation or the sample standard deviation. Here's a case where they actually had a big difference between the two. They were not the same. So you want to remind yourself when you use which one so that you write down the right answer. Then we had measures of position. Those were quartiles or percentiles or z-scores. We also had the 5-number summary, which led us into box plots. This section also is where we finally started using the calculator a little more heavily and got out of the vocabulary and into the numbers, so the calculator became a handy tool. In here you might remember that all this stuff was found under the 1var stats option, where you could find the mean, you can find the variance, you can find the standard deviation, you can find the 5-number summary, but you need to be able to remember that green part, how to get there. How do you get the data into the list? That's the stat menu, and edit, and then put the data into list 1, then run the 1-variable statistics on list 1. So your notes might look like this. It might be more detailed, they might be less detailed, but whatever it is, you want to review this bit and say, yes, okay, I remember to use 1-variable statistics to find these things. Next we bumped it up and started talking about probability, and there were a whole lot of formulas, and the calculator was handy, but it was not pre-programmed for all this stuff. The basic probability, the probability of any event E, is the number of ways you can get E. Whatever that event is, draw a red card, pick a queen, roll a 1 on 6-sided die. However many ways you can get that event to happen out of the number of total possibilities. That's just a simple probability assignment. So if you get confused in any of the probability questions, you just lean back on that idea. Well, how many ways can I get what I want, and what are the total number of possibilities? Then that can become a little bit intense or a little bit complicated, so we used other rules to simplify that idea. The first was the complement rule. The complement rule is what happens when you have the probability of not doing something, the probability that event does not happen, or E complement, or sometimes it's just E prime. So not the probability of drawing a queen, but the probability of not drawing a queen. So when you see that word not, we can use the complement rule, 1 minus the probability of that event happening. The event either happens or it doesn't. If we know the probability of it happening, we can find the probability of it not happening by using the complement rule. Then we had the addition, the multiplication, and the conditional probability rules. Addition is addition, right? A plus. We use that when we saw problems with or. Multiplication we use when we saw problems with and conditional probabilities when we see problems with the word given. If the problem isn't stated with one of these words in it, that's when you need to restate it. there's a problem in the homework about liking both songs. So the probability that you like both songs doesn't say or and. So you have to think to yourself, well, 2 songs are played. I hadn't talk about the probability of liking the first song, and I can talk about the probability of liking the second song. Is it a probability of this one or that one, or is it a probability of this one and that one? So you have to be able to think through it. Well, if I like both songs, that means I like the first and the second. So I'm going to use the multiplication rule for these 2 probabilities. The other one that trips people up is this given probability statements, like what it means to have a conditional probability. The condition affects the probability. So the condition restricts the number of possibilities. Let me show you some examples here from the final review. Here's the probability section, page 4. Page 5, let's see, given. Okay, so number 37. The managers were surveyed given that a manager is only a fair manager. So only looking at these fair managers, what is the probability that this manager has no college background? That's a conditional probability. The condition is we are only looking at the fair managers. We don't care at all about any of the other types of managers, right? We're restricting our possibilities to just the fair managers. Now, among the fair managers, of which there are 87 total, those that have no college background have just the high school degree, right? So that's the 6 people out of 87 total. We would talk about that as the probability of having no college background, I'll use N for that, given that they are only a fair manager. So you don't need the notation, you need the value, but you gotta understand what it means. We use the conditional probabilities in problems like number 38, where there's a bunch of chocolates in a box, you pick one and eat it. And then you pick a second piece. So you have a first and a second piece. Now you want the probability of getting 2 solid chocolates. So the first piece, you just reach right in that box, there's 38 options, and 9 of them are solid chocolate. But then you eat that piece, right? So those 9 solid chocolates went down to 8. That's a conditional probability. Because you ate one, there are only 8 solid chocolates left. In fact, there aren't even 38 left in there because you ate one, right? So there are 37. This guy, the 8 out of 37, that's the conditional probability. The condition was you ate a piece of chocolate. Now the probability of doing both of these in a row, it doesn't say and or, so then you use your thoughts and you say, okay, what happened in the first one? Then we have the second. I ate a solid chocolate and I ate another solid chocolate, and means multiply. So you multiply those 2 guys together.